Welcome to Room 57, the place where chilling mysteries, unsolved crimes, and dark stories are explored. Today, we're diving into the haunting tale of one of America's most notorious serial killers, known by the unsettling nickname of the Happy Face Killer, Keith Jesperson. But why the Happy Face Killer? What made this man, a seemingly ordinary truck driver, become one of the most feared criminals in America? What drove him to commit brutal murders and leave behind chilling messages taunting law enforcement and the public alike? Keith Jesperson's story isn't just one of a serial killer, it's a story of arrogance, sadism, and a chilling game with the justice system. He not only killed, but left behind a trail of taunting letters, challenging authorities to catch him. But who is he really? And how did he carry out his gruesome acts without getting caught for so long? In today's video, we'll take a deep dive into the life and crimes of Keith Jesperson, a man who brought terror to the streets and is forever etched in criminal history as the Happy Face Killer. From his first murder to the moment he was finally caught, this story will keep you on the edge of your seat, questioning how someone could commit such horrific crimes and wonder what could have been done to stop him sooner. Stay with us as we uncover the dark path that led Keith Jesperson from a seemingly normal life to becoming one of the most infamous serial killers of the 20th century. Part 1. The early years and the making of a killer. Keith Jesperson was born on April 6, 1955, in the small town of St. John, Canada. His early life was marred by violence, neglect, and emotional abandonment, elements that would eventually shape his personality and actions in terrifying ways. The road to becoming one of the most infamous serial killers in America didn't begin with a single moment of evil, but with a series of compounded experiences that twisted his psyche. Growing up in a dysfunctional and abusive household, Jesperson's formative years were spent in an environment that was far from loving. His father, Albert Jesperson, was a man known for his violent temper and alcoholism, which often spilled over into physical abuse toward his wife and children. Keith, the oldest of 5 children, was often a witness to his father's unpredictable rages. The fear and helplessness of living in an abusive household would later evolve into an overwhelming sense of anger and powerlessness, emotions that would remain with him throughout his life. At a young age, Jesperson began to develop a desire to control and dominate those around him, a trait that would eventually be reflected in his gruesome crimes. His mother, Elaine, was emotionally distant and often powerless to stand up to her husband's aggression. Jesperson later admitted that his relationship with his mother was strained. She was emotionally unavailable, and the lack of nurturing and affection in his early years deeply affected him. As a child, Jesperson often sought refuge in his imagination. He was a solitary figure, shunned by his peers and bullied for his awkwardness. This sense of isolation became a cornerstone of his personality. Jesperson was far from a popular or charismatic child. Instead, he was a loner, and as he grew older, he began to retreat further into himself. He later recalled that his early experiences made him believe that violence was an effective way to get what he wanted, the formation of a dark fantasy. As Jesperson entered adolescence, his personality began to reflect the damaged foundation of his early years. He struggled to connect with others, and his isolation grew. His experiences with violence and emotional neglect fueled his internal anger and resentment toward the world around him. He began to fantasize about exerting control over others' fantasies that eventually evolved into something far darker. In his early teenage years, Jesperson became fascinated with serial killers, particularly with their ability to elude capture. He saw them not as monsters, but as figures of power, men who were untouchable, who could take lives and play with the police and public in ways that fascinated him. These ideas began to consume him. It was during this time that the first seeds of his sadistic desires were planted. Jesperson's troubled teenage years were marked by a deepening interest in domination and violence. He was still an outsider in school, often mocked and ridiculed by his peers, which only strengthened his sense of alienation. His emotional and psychological development was severely hindered by the lack of love and stability in his home life. Jesperson started to imagine how it would feel to be untouchable, how it would feel to have the power to take someone's life and control their fate entirely. These fantasies only grew stronger as he entered adulthood. Entering adulthood, the perfect mask. As an adult, Jesperson managed to mask his inner turmoil with an outwardly normal life. He joined the ranks of working-class America and became a truck driver, a profession that would allow him to travel alone, away from the chaos of his family life. But despite the external stability, Jesperson was far from content. Beneath the surface, he was a ticking time bomb, holding on to deep, unresolved anger and resentment toward the world. In 1975, at the age of 20, Jesperson married a woman named Rose, and the two had a daughter together. Despite his outward appearance as a loving father and husband, Jesperson continued to harbor dark desires. His marriage was marked by a cycle of infidelity and emotional neglect. Jesperson's wife later claimed that their relationship was often volatile, with Jesperson displaying a disturbing detachment and lack of empathy. Although he was a father, Jesperson's emotional involvement in the family was minimal, and his obsession with power and control began to manifest in his personal life as well. Over time, Jesperson's need for dominance began to intensify. He would often find himself fantasizing about hurting people, and these fantasies began to involve sexual violence. His interest in domination had now evolved into something darker, something he could no longer suppress. But despite these mounting feelings of rage, he continued to lead a double life. Jesperson's ability to hide his dark side behind a facade of normalcy was chilling. He was a loving father to his daughter, a hardworking truck driver, and yet, lurking beneath the surface, was a man who was becoming increasingly obsessed with violence. Jesperson's internal conflict came to a head in the early 1990s when he began to act on his violent impulses. The first murder, Tanja Bennett in 1990, at the age of 35, Keith Jesperson finally crossed the line from fantasy to reality. His first known victim was Tanja Bennett, a 23-year-old woman living in Portland, Oregon. Jesperson picked her up while he was driving his truck and lured her into his vehicle. Once inside, he overpowered her and drove her to a remote area, where he proceeded to brutally assault and kill her. Jesperson later described the act as something that gave him a strange sense of power, the ultimate control over someone's life. He recalled feeling an intense rush, one that he could not explain or rationalize. For the first time, he felt like he had taken control of his life in a way that was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He had the power to take someone's life, to decide who lived and who died. And for Jesperson, this sense of power was intoxicating. After killing Tanja, Jesperson dumped her body in a secluded area, and for months, no one suspected him. His perfect mask continued to hold, and the happy-faced killer remained a phantom, an invisible force that was unaccountable for his actions. However, Jesperson did something unusual. After his first murder, he didn't remain silent. The letters began, a challenge to the authorities. After the murder of Tanja Bennett, Jesperson did something that would set him apart from other serial killers. He began sending letters to the police and local media outlets. These letters were not the desperate ramblings of a man trying to avoid capture. Instead, they were full of pride and arrogance, almost as if he were daring authorities to catch him. He signed the letters with the chilling pseudonym, the Happy Face Killer, and included a drawing of a smiley face at the bottom, a mocking symbol of his twisted game. In the letters, Jesperson taunted the police, providing cryptic details about the murders he had committed, including information that only the killer would know. He boasted about his ability to evade capture and mocked the police for their inability to find him. Jesperson's ability to not only kill, but to taunt the authorities was what truly made him a terrifying figure. He wasn't just a killer, he was a manipulator, a sadistic man who wanted to play games with the system, showing the world how superior he felt. These letters were a direct challenge to the justice system, and they would remain a part of his legacy for years to come. The Happy Face Killer wasn't just hiding in plain sight, he was toying with the very people tasked with bringing him to justice. The path of blood, more murders to come. With each new murder, Jesperson's confidence grew. He killed without remorse, each victim serving as another trophy in his twisted game. And with each murder, he sent another letter, taunting the police, further fueling his sense of superiority. It wasn't just about the killings for Jesperson, it was about the control. The power he felt as he watched the police scramble for answers, unable to connect the dots, was enough to keep him going. For years, Jesperson's identity remained a mystery. His crimes were brutal and calculated, yet he was elusive. He lived among the people, a truck driver, a father, a husband. But lurking within him was a darkness that would eventually lead to more death and more suffering. Part 2. The letters, the victims, and the increasing arrogance. After Keith Jesperson murdered his first victim, Tanja Bennett, he did not stop. Far from it. The thrill and power of taking a life ignited something dark within him. He wasn't just a killer, he was now playing a twisted game with law enforcement. His next murders would be more calculated, more deliberate, and more heinous. But what set him apart from other serial killers wasn't just his actions, it was his arrogance and desire for recognition. Jesperson didn't want to remain in the shadows. He wanted to be seen, to be feared, and to be unpunished. With each murder, his confidence grew, and he became more brazen, sending cryptic letters to local media outlets and law enforcement agencies. His correspondence was calculated, designed to taunt and humiliate those trying to solve the mystery. The more the police scrambled to find him, the more arrogant Jesperson became. The more they failed, the more superior he felt. The letters began. The taunting of the police. Keith Jesperson's letters weren't just ordinary confessions, they were challenges, taunting, mocking, and boasting. He wrote with a chilling air of superiority. In each letter, Jesperson provided details about the crime's details only the killer would know, and dared the police to figure out who he was. He was playing a game with law enforcement, knowing that he held all the cards. He signed his letters with the now infamous Happy Face Killer and often included a smiley face symbol. At the bottom of each correspondence, this eerie signature became synonymous with Jesperson's twisted identity, further cementing his notoriety. In his letters, he spoke openly about his enjoyment in committing murder, stating that killing gave him pleasure, that he reveled in the fear he instilled in his victims and their families. Jesperson's letters were a deliberate attempt to control the narrative, to make himself the star of the story, to be celebrated as the man who outsmarted the police. His arrogance knew no bounds. The letters were an outlet for his desire for attention, as he reveled in the fact that the authorities were powerless to stop him. These letters were more than just notes of confession, they were psychological warfare. The victims, more lives taken as his reign of terror continued. Jesperson picked up where he left off, selecting his victims with methodical precision. His first murder had been an isolated incident, but now it became a pattern. He began to target vulnerable women, often lonely, isolated, and vulnerable. These women were often hitchhikers or women traveling alone, offering an easy target for someone like Jesperson, who was skilled at manipulating his victims into trusting him. Before unleashing his deadly violence. In 1990, only months after Tonja Bennett's murder, Jesperson killed his second victim, Claudia Seabrook, a 23-year-old woman who was last seen hitchhiking. Like the others, she was assaulted, strangled, and dumped in a remote area. Jesperson then waited, and when no one connected him to the crime, he did what he knew best. He sent a letter to the police. It was as if he wanted to fuel the fire. Watching the police struggle to find any leads. In his letter, Jesperson again taunted law enforcement, boasting of his ability to remain undetected. With each murder, his confidence grew, and with each letter he sent, he seemed to enjoy the power he held over the investigation. He reveled in the idea that no one was smart enough to catch him, and he took pleasure in the frustration he caused for the authorities. It was clear now, Jesperson wasn't just killing for the thrill. He was playing a game. The smiley face, letters, a sadistic game of cat and mouse. Jesperson's game reached its next level of cruelty when he began sending a series of letters directly to newspapers, TV stations, and law enforcement agencies. These letters not only described his crimes in gruesome detail, but also mocked and belittled the police, challenging them to figure out who he was. He signed these letters with the now infamous Happy Face, creating a twisted visual representation of his dominance over the situation. One of the most disturbing aspects of these letters was not just the details of the crimes, but the fact that Jesperson enjoyed taunting the victims' families and the public. His letters were designed to create fear, not only in the authorities, but in the public at large. His words cut deep, and his psychological manipulation left everyone questioning whether anyone was safe. In these letters, Jesperson openly mocked the police's inability to solve the case. He went as far as to tell the public that he was enjoying the chase, knowing full well that they were struggling to catch him. And for Jesperson, that was the ultimate thrill. The first real break in the case, a survivor's testimony. Despite his arrogance and belief that he was invincible, Jesperson made one crucial mistake. He left a survivor. In 1995, Jesperson's third victim, Holly Dunlap, survived an attack. After being assaulted, she managed to escape and identify her attacker, a rare moment in this twisted story that would lead to Jesperson's eventual downfall. Holly Dunlap's testimony was a turning point for law enforcement. She described the man who attacked her in great detail, and her testimony began to close the net around Jesperson. While Holly was the first to survive his brutality, there were other women who did not. As investigators pieced together the clues, they began to link the murders to a single suspect, the Happy Face Killer. For the first time, Jesperson's identity began to surface, and authorities were able to connect him to the crimes through DNA evidence and witness testimony. However, Jesperson wasn't going to be easily caught. Even as the investigation progressed, his ego swelled, and he continued to send his taunting letters, all the while knowing that his capture was imminent. The arrest and confession in 1995. After a series of painstaking investigations, police finally closed in on Keith Jesperson. The letters, his history of violence, and the survivor's testimony all pointed to him. Jesperson was arrested, and the once seemingly invincible killer was finally taken into custody. What followed was both shocking and disturbing. Jesperson confessed to killing at least 8 women, though he claimed to have killed many more. As he was interrogated, Jesperson revealed the chilling details of his killings, but he did so with an unsettling calmness, almost as if he were discussing a routine event rather than the brutal murders of innocent people. His confidence didn't falter, and even as he was arrested, Jesperson maintained his smugness, still feeling that he was superior to the very system that had brought him down. The aftermath, a legacy of horror. Keith Jesperson was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes, but the aftermath of his killings left an indelible mark on the victims' families and the public. Jesperson's need for recognition, his desire to control the narrative, and his twisted joy in tormenting those who sought justice made him one of the most sadistic serial killers in history. Though he was convicted of 8 murders, Jesperson claimed he had killed many more, though these claims were never fully verified. However, his legacy remains, the chilling reminder of a man who used psychological warfare to feed his ego, and who took pleasure in the fear he caused. Even behind bars, his letters continued to haunt the memories of those who followed his story. Part 3, The Trial, Confession, and Legacy. After a long and painstaking investigation, Keith Jesperson, known as the Happy Face Killer, was finally arrested in 1995. However, the arrest didn't immediately end the psychological torment he had inflicted on his victims, their families, and the authorities. While behind bars, Jesperson's arrogance and taunting nature continued to haunt everyone involved in the case. Even as his final fate was being determined, Jesperson, who had delighted in sending cryptic, mocking letters to the police and the media, now faced the very thing he had been so sure he could avoid: justice. But rather than expressing remorse or regret for his actions, he doubled down on his self-perceived superiority, admitting to at least 8 murders and claiming that he had committed many more. The chilling calmness with which he confessed to his crimes sent shockwaves through the justice system and through the minds of the families whose loved ones had been taken from them. The trial, a cold, calculated killer. Jesperson's trial was a public spectacle, and the details surrounding the case only deepened the horror. As the prosecution laid out the evidence against him, his DNA, the survivor's testimony, and the letters he had sent to the media, Jesperson seemed indifferent to the gravity of the situation. It became clear that, for him, the murder was merely a game. What was perhaps the most chilling part of Jesperson's trial was the way he lacked empathy for his victims. In court, he didn't display any emotion when hearing about the suffering he had caused. Instead, he remained aloof, almost as if he were detached from the realities of what he had done. This behavior only reinforced the idea that Jesperson wasn't just a killer, he was a predator, someone who saw his victims not as human beings, but as tools to fuel his ego. During the trial, Jesperson's defense sought to argue that he had been influenced by his abusive upbringing. While it was true that his childhood had been riddled with violence and neglect, the court recognized that his actions were far beyond the typical struggles that might stem from a difficult past. The fact that he had consciously chosen to take lives, even boasting about it, indicated a deep-seated malevolence that could not be attributed merely to a rough childhood. The confession, revelations from a cold-blooded killer. Although the evidence against Jesperson was damning, one of the most chilling aspects of his case was his confession. During interrogation, Jesperson calmly admitted to the murders of at least 8 women, but he was far from apologetic. Instead, he seemed to take pride in his actions, even boasting about how he managed to evade capture for so long. His confession was almost methodical, as if he were explaining an abstract concept rather than recounting the horrific details of his crimes. Jesperson didn't just confess to his known victims. He claimed there were others unsolved cases, victims that he had murdered, but whose deaths had gone unnoticed. One of his most unsettling comments was that he enjoyed the power he felt when he killed. For him, murder was not just a means to an end, it was a way to exercise control, a way to impose his dominance over others in a world that he felt had wronged him. His ability to compartmentalize his emotions and view his victims as nothing more than pawns in his sadistic game was chilling. One of the most haunting aspects of Jesperson's confession was the lack of emotion. He spoke of his killings with the same detachment as someone might describe a mundane event. He was, in his own words, proud of what he had done, and he felt that the justice system had failed in its ability to catch him sooner. His words reflected a man who, despite being behind bars, felt he had won. The aftermath of Jesperson's actions rippled far beyond his arrest. The families of his victims were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. In many ways, the trauma of losing a loved one to such a brutal and senseless crime is beyond comprehension. But for the families of Jesperson's victims, the ordeal was compounded by the fact that his arrogance and public confession seemed to mock their grief. The public, too, was left grappling with the disturbing reality of how a man who appeared to lead a seemingly normal life could commit such heinous acts without raising suspicion for so long. The case brought attention to the chilling reality that a serial killer could operate in plain sight, hiding behind a facade of normalcy while secretly committing atrocities. Jesperson had been a truck driver, someone who had been on the road for hours at a time, someone who appeared to be a common man, someone who could easily blend in without arousing suspicion. It was a reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters, they could be ordinary people, hiding their darkness beneath a mask of respectability. For years, Jesperson's identity had been a mystery, but once he was caught, his case became a national spectacle. The media obsession with the happy-face killer reflected the deep fascination people have with serial killers. Jesperson's ability to toy with the police and the public through his letters, coupled with his lack of remorse or empathy, made him a subject of macabre intrigue. Keith Jesperson's legacy is one of terror, manipulation, and chilling pride in his own actions. Even behind bars, he continued to flaunt his superiority, taunting the world with his dark thoughts and disturbing letters. His crimes and the aftermath of his capture continue to haunt the families of his victims and serve as a stark reminder of the dark depths of the human psyche. In prison, Jesperson still maintained his self-proclaimed superiority. He was known to boast to fellow inmates about his crimes, yet he also made some strange statements, claiming he had been influenced by a higher power to carry out his murders. Despite these claims, it was clear to everyone that Jesperson's dark nature was rooted in his own psychosis, a twisted desire for dominance and control over the years. Some of the unsolved cases that Jesperson had alluded to have been investigated, but there remains a lingering question. How many more people did he kill? His claims of killing more victims were never fully substantiated, but it's clear that he enjoyed the psychological toll his actions took on his victims and the law enforcement that pursued him. Jesperson's case serves as a reminder that the face of evil can often be masked by the most ordinary of facades. His ability to kill with cold calculation without leaving a trace for so long is a testament to the evil that can lurk beneath the surface. Today, Keith Jesperson is serving a life sentence in prison, but his story is far from over. Although he has confessed to at least 8 murders, many believe that his true body count is much higher. What's clear is that Jesperson's case is a chilling reminder of the darkness within some people, how it can remain hidden for years, only to be unleashed with horrifying consequences. His legacy as the happy face killer will remain one of the most disturbing cases of serial murder in modern history, but the legacy of the lives he took, those who were loved and cherished, will outlast the notoriety of the man who killed them. Justice may have caught up with him, but the damage he inflicted cannot be undone. Jesperson's story will continue to be a grim lesson for law enforcement, for the public, and for everyone who dares to look into the abyss of the human soul. Part 4. The unsettling aftermath and unanswered questions. Keith Jesperson, the man who taunted police and media for years with his disturbing letters and chilling murders, may have been captured in a prison, but the legacy of his crimes is not easily erased. Though the case seemed closed with his arrest and conviction, the haunting nature of his actions continues to affect the victims' families, the public, and even those who investigated his crimes. As we dive deeper into the aftermath of Jesperson's crimes, we explore the lasting impact of his brutal actions, the lingering questions surrounding his possible other victims, and the eerie insight into a mind that thrived on fear and control. One of the most devastating aspects of Jesperson's reign of terror was the profound impact it had on the families of his victims. For the families who lost loved ones to his cruelty, the damage went far beyond the immediate horror of their deaths. The fact that Jesperson continued to flaunt his superiority even while incarcerated, sending letters that mocked their grief, made the healing process even more excruciating. Each family was left with a sense of unresolved grief, knowing that their loved ones' deaths were not just random acts of violence, but part of a larger, twisted game that Jesperson had orchestrated. The fact that he prided himself on evading justice for so long made it even harder for those left behind. For these families, the closure they sought was elusive. The murders of their daughters, sisters, and mothers were reduced to little more than a challenge to the police, a psychological battle that had nothing to do with the lives that had been lost. Even though Jesperson was behind bars, the psychological toll of his actions remained. The families had to reconcile with the fact that their loved ones were not just murdered, they were manipulated and taunted by a man who felt nothing but pleasure in their suffering. The question of more victims, one of the most chilling aspects of the happy face killer case, is that even after his arrest, there are still unanswered questions about the full scope of his crimes. Jesperson, in his own confession, claimed to have murdered at least 8 women, but hinted at having killed many more. His admission that there were other victims' murders that were never solved has haunted law enforcement as they tried to determine just how many people were lost at the hands of this sadistic killer. Jesperson's pattern of behavior, choosing vulnerable women, often hitchhikers or women traveling alone, suggests that there may be other unsolved cases from the 1980s and early 1990s that remain linked to him. Cold cases in remote locations across the United States have been re-examined in the wake of his conviction, with some investigators wondering if Jesperson's murderous spree was more widespread than originally believed. Unfortunately, despite Jesperson's claims, not all of his confessed murders could be corroborated, and several remain uncertain. His compulsive desire to take credit for unverified crimes muddied the waters, leaving investigators with a troubling dilemma. How many victims did he truly have? The psychological profile of Keith Jesperson, what truly sets Jesperson apart from other serial killers, is the chilling psychological profile that emerged from his case. Unlike many others who commit murders driven by rage, sexual compulsion, or psychotic delusions, Jesperson's killings seem to be about something much darker: control. He didn't kill out of blind anger, nor was he driven by sexual urges. His murders were methodical, carefully planned, and executed with a cold precision that suggested an almost clinical detachment from his victims. Suffering? For Jesperson, murder was a way to assert his dominance, a twisted form of self-expression. Each victim was a symbol of his power over the world, and he took pleasure in knowing that he could take a life and remain untouched by the law. The letters Jesperson sent were further evidence of his disturbing need for attention. It wasn't enough for him to kill, he needed to be seen. He wanted to be acknowledged for his crimes, to become a figure of infamy, someone whose actions would be remembered long after he was gone. His desire for recognition was so powerful that it overshadowed any sense of fear or remorse. He was a man who was, in his own mind, superior to the law, superior to the people trying to catch him. His egocentric view of himself as a mastermind made him a chilling figure of psychological evil. For law enforcement, Jesperson's case presented a unique and terrifying challenge. As with many serial killers, there was no single identifiable pattern, no clear motive that could easily link the victims. The victims weren't the same age, they weren't from the same socioeconomic background, and they weren't killed in the same manner. What made the case particularly unsettling was the fact that Jesperson didn't fit the usual profile of a serial killer. His ability to blend in with the public, acting as an average truck driver, a father, a husband, made him almost invisible. He moved across state lines, and his work as a long-haul trucker allowed him to be in multiple cities, making it nearly impossible for authorities to track his movements. It wasn't until he made the crucial mistake of taunting police with his letters that they were able to focus their investigation on him. Despite the letters, investigators were left scrambling to put the pieces together. They found themselves chasing dead ends, relying on hunches, and piecing together details from the various crime scenes, each one more complex than the last. Jesperson's ability to evade capture was part of the reason he was so feared by law enforcement. He was calculated, careful, and had the audacity to outsmart the very system that was supposed to catch him. The final fall behind bars when Jesperson was finally arrested, it was the culmination of years of painstaking work by law enforcement. But even after his capture, the story of the happy-faced killer didn't end. He continued to taunt police, inmates, and even the public from behind bars. His arrogance remained, even in captivity, as he continued to make disturbing comments about his crimes. Despite his prison sentence, the psychological impact of his actions was far from over. For the families of his victims, justice had been served, but the emotional wounds never fully healed. No amount of prison time could ever bring back the lives Jesperson had taken or undo the horror he had caused. Jesperson's chilling indifference to his victims' suffering left a stain on the memories of everyone involved in his case. The lasting legacy of the happy-faced killer today, Keith Jesperson, remains behind bars, serving a life sentence for his crimes. But his legacy as the happy-faced killer continues to haunt us, not only for the brutal murders he committed, but for the twisted psychological game he played with the world. His letters, his taunting attitude, and his sheer arrogance remain as disturbing reminders of the evil that can hide beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary individuals. The public's fascination with serial killers remains, and Jesperson's case is often cited as one of the most chilling examples of how a normal man could carry out such horrific acts. But behind the notoriety, the letters, and the infamy, there remains the reality of the lives lost and the families destroyed. Jesperson may have been captured, but the pain he caused will forever echo in the memories of his victims' families. The legacy of the happy-faced killer serves as a grim reminder that evil can lurk where you least expect it, and that sometimes the most terrifying killers are the ones who hide in plain sight. As we come to the end of the story of Keith Jesperson, the happy-faced killer, we reflect on the chilling legacy left behind by this man. Jesperson's reign of terror was marked not only by brutal murders, but by his terrifying psychological games, leaving a trail of suffering for his victims' families and a society grappling with the fear of the unknown. Through his taunting letters, his calculated killings, and his cold indifference toward the lives he took, Jesperson became a symbol of a type of evil that is difficult to comprehend. His case serves as a sobering reminder that monsters don't always appear as we expect them to. They could be ordinary people, hiding in plain sight, blending in, and only revealing their true nature when it's too late. Despite the arrest and conviction, there are still many unanswered questions. How many victims did Jesperson truly have? Are there more bodies hidden in cold cases? The terror he instilled was far-reaching, and even today, the dark shadow of his actions continues to loom over law enforcement, the public, and the families of his victims. But one thing is certain: his capture doesn't erase the pain he caused. The families of his victims will never be the same, and justice, while served, can never fully heal the wounds he left behind. If you follow the story of Keith Jesperson, you've witnessed the true horror of his crimes. But there are still many cases out there unsolved, unexplained, that could hold the key to understanding the full scope of his killing spree. If you or someone you know has information about a cold case, or if you believe there are unresolved mysteries in your community, we urge you to speak up. Don't stay silent. Your voice could be the one that helps bring closure to a family still searching for answers. Like this video if you found the story chilling, and share it with others to raise awareness about the dangers that can exist even in the most unsuspecting places. Subscribe to our channel for more unsettling tales from the world of true crime. We will continue to bring you deeper insights into the minds of those who commit these horrendous acts and explore the mysteries that still remain unresolved. Lastly, remember, justice is never truly complete until all the answers are found. If you have any tips or information related to unsolved cases, reach out to your local authorities. You never know, your knowledge might just be the missing piece that leads to justice. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop seeking the truth.